What if you could help others to find the power to heal themselves? Physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
When I started teaching my classes, it was in 2002, and I was just doing the past life regressions and contacting the subconscious part. But then as the time went on and we found how powerful this was and what we could do with it, a lot of the students began saying, you know, advanced past life regression doesn't really tell what it's all about. This is so much more than that. We think you should change the name. So it was a few years ago we decided to change the name to Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique. And this is the healing technique that we've now been teaching it, well, since 2002, that's 12 years.
What if you could time travel with them? Visit mythical places or angelic realms, other worlds, other galaxies. Help others to speak to their higher selves. You can. Dolores has taught thousands of people from across the world how to use QHHT, and now you can learn her method by going directly to dolorescannon.com. And don't forget to mention the discount code MORETALKS. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Kevin Moore Show. Now, if you want to stay up to date with all my latest videos, just click that subscribe button below, as it really helps to support the show. If you're new to the show, I interview guests from a spiritual perspective, covering mainstream and alternative subjects, real-life inspirational stories, and much more. On today's show, I'm about to be joined by my guest, Mark Anthony. Now, Mark's father passed away suddenly, leading Mark down a remarkable path of discovery. Mark spends a good portion of his time exploring evidence suggestive of the survival of consciousness beyond the demise of the physical body. A part of Mark's story is told in the Netflix documentary series, Surviving Death. Mark Anthony, thank you for joining me.
It's my pleasure to be here. Yeah, thanks a lot for having me.
And thank you for making the time today to do this on a Sunday as well. Really appreciate it. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. So this is your first book, Love, Dad.
It's actually my second book. First book on the topic of the possibility of life after death, or the nature of consciousness.
Right. Okay. What was the previous book before that then?
Something completely unrelated. It's about my day job is working as the bar manager for Hamilton on Broadway, and I wrote a book about my experiences there.
I did see that, actually. I did see that in your bio. I just forgot about it there because there's so much to what you're doing right now. And obviously that's all shut down, Hamilton is. But for those who may not know what Hamilton is, that are international, what is Hamilton?
Hamilton is a musical written by Lin-Manuel Miranda that's on Broadway, and it's also touring, and it's, you know, in Australia and on the West End, and it's just this phenomenon. It's a musical that transcended the world of musical theater in a way that few shows, if any, ever have.
Yeah. You know, I've caught bits of it, and I enjoy it. I enjoyed what I watched, and I need to watch the whole thing, right? But and I know you've brushed shoulders with some amazing people during the tenure that you spent there as well.
Yeah, I got to meet some great people, like, you know, Barack Obama. President Obama came to the show twice, and the first year of Hamilton, everyone was coming to the show. So, you know, childhood sports heroes of mine, for instance, actors, political figures, everyone came to the show. Yeah, it truly is a work of genius. So it's on Disney Plus also now, so people can see it that way. It's truly extraordinary.
That's where I probably caught a bit of a clip of it, actually, was through Disney Plus. But I've met people who just love the show as well. So let's just go back a bit in time here. So prior to this story taking place, so at school or at high school or uni, I don't know what you call it over here. I suppose everything's called school over here, isn't it? Right. So yeah.
I was gonna say, yeah, well, high school, then secondary, you know, college, grad school.
Yeah,
Those were the
yeah. Well, in the UK, we call the next evolution after college, which is uni, but you guys still call it sort of school over here, right? Which is always confuses me sometimes, right? But it was when you was at the I guess was it not high school? You was at college when you decided to change your career path from wanting to be a scientist to wanting to get into acting. So if you want to take it from there.
That's science teacher. Yeah, I had planned on being a high school science teacher. I've always loved science growing up, but I've also done acting sort of on the side. And while I was majoring in geology, I was minoring in acting and theater. And then, science ended up, some of the questions that science leaves us with. Ended up making me not want to spend my whole life pursuing it. I talk about in the book about how having this discussion with a professor of mine about gravity, which is a fundamental force of nature, right? And at the end of it, I was like, but, I raised my hand and asked, but what exactly is it? What is it? And he said, it's a force. And yes, I understand that, but what is happening actually in a mechanical sense? What is gravity? And the bottom line is we just don't know. The fundamentals that all of our math and all of our science is built on is a mystery. We know about protons and neutrons and electrons and maybe quarks and gluons and these other theoretical particles. But what makes up a quark, we don't know. So we have speculations, and the math is way beyond me. In my opinion, you have to be something of a genius to really understand the math. But these are basically mathematic formulations. They're not anything that we can actually really put our hands on. So one of the mathematic theorems leads to something called string theory, right? Which a lot of people have heard of, which postulates that or theorizes that it's vibrating strings that are the very base of matter, vibrating strings of energy. And it's the rate of the vibration of the string that gives the bit its physical properties, right? How quickly or slowly it's vibrating alters how it interacts with the stuff around it. But what is making the string vibrate, if that is the case? And again, we don't know. So, when I learned about all of this in science, though I still love science is amazing, right? And it's enabled these incredible things. We just landed a rover on Mars. I had tears in my eyes. Incredible. I mean, I was weeping watching that happen. And science gave us that. The human intellect is an amazing thing, but still at a foundational level, we just don't know. And for me, that knowledge, I've always been fascinated by the world, scientifically speaking, but also just human beings and what our place in all of this is. And acting was like just another way of examining what life is. Science was maybe on one end of the spectrum, and acting was another. Acting is about studying human behavior and getting to know what it is to be a human being, and what those interactions mean. So it was sort of two sides of the same coin for me, but I ended up going into acting instead.
And as you say in the book, pretty loving and supporting parents to do that because, in Europe, it's not so expensive to do some of these things like, well, university is getting more expensive, but I mean, it's not as expensive as it is over here. You're talking tens and tens of thousands.
If not hundreds of thousands, depending on what type of, what you're studying, what school you're going to. Yeah. Enormously expensive. Yeah. Yes. My parents none of my life would have been possible without I mean, I'm still paying back my loans. I still have those,
I get you.
But
Yeah.
even just to be an actor, I went to grad school to be and so anyway, that's how I ended up behind the bar at Hamilton. Is the acting, is also not a very lucrative proposition most of the time. So most actors have day jobs, and that's how I became a bartender.
I know some friends, well, a friend as well that's over there right now who's an actor, and he was just saying how, different New York is right now. Do you know what I mean? Not just the rental prices, right? But there's not the great number of people that were there as before, obviously. It is, it's weird times. And do you think it was really sort of the right time to put this book out to the public right now?
Well, in a way, it's sort of for some people, it's a reminder of the power of theater. I mean, the book is all about the power that theater has to help us learn, to grow, to heal in some ways. So I think, yeah, the book came out at the right time. As, you know, we've been shut down on Broadway since March, so we're coming up on a year now. And though I think people appreciate theater and what it means to be able to be together in a theater. This year, of course, as it's going to do for so many things, it's going to help us not take for granted what that is, I think. So, yeah, and I just happen to have the time because we've been shut down for a year to write these two books. It just happened to work out that the timing happened during the pandemic.
And just before we get into the bigger part of your story here, how can people support you and contact you?
MikeAnthony.com is where I have all of the where I'll keep you up to date on everything that I'm working on.
Okay, and we'll get into other projects that you're doing just after we speak about this incredible story. So, I guess let's go to the point where let's bring Dad into this. So, what was your relationship with Dad like? And what was growing up like? Just what was just that? Because sometimes relationships can be different for everyone when it comes to parents.
Certainly, yeah. Yeah, I was very lucky, like I said, with my parents, and my dad and I were incredibly close. My dad was, a lot of people think that their father is great or their mom is great. My dad, I truly was not an average human being in terms of his just innate goodness. You know, he was an extraordinarily kind, decent man who all he worried about was everyone else. I tell the story in the book that when I was a kid, at one point, I actually started to believe that my dad might be an angel. You know, we were not a very religious family, but we had, I think my mom was sort of covering the bases just in case, confirmation is how you get to heaven. We might as well do it. So I did my first communion and all of that stuff and learned about angels and things. And at one point, my dad seemed so different than other adults in my life. In his nature, his kind nature, that one day we were in the kitchen and I'm like, Dad, are you an angel? Just tell me the truth. I swear to God, I won't tell anybody. Your secret will be safe with me. Are you an angel? And he was like, what do you mean? And I said, you're just so nice to everyone. And he said, well, you should always try to be nice, and that was all that he said about it, which I was very sure that was exactly what an angel would say. So he was, my family, like many families, we're all crazy. We all have our problems. My parents were divorced when I was young. But my dad was sort of the eye in the center of my family's hurricane. He was the guy that you went to if there was any kind of trouble, no matter what it was. I remember one time breaking down maybe 100 miles from my dad's house. I was on my way driving up to college up in New Hampshire. And I broke down on the side of the road and it's winter. And my dad drove all the way up with a tire to fix that tire. I mean, he was just a remarkable guy. And losing him, if there was anyone that we would need after having a shocking loss, it would have been my dad. He would have been the guy, the person to have made everything okay, So not only did we lose my dad, we lost the person who would have helped us get through that kind of a thing. And his death was a total shock to us. He was 60 and he was a young 60. As far as we knew, he was in very good shape. He worked as a delivery man for FedEx, so a very active job, very active guy. And to us, his death came out of absolutely out of nowhere. So it was a total, complete, devastating shock. And I was left feeling something I had never felt before. The devastation was beyond anything I can even put into words. And it actually threw me into a full-on existential crisis. as much as I've always loved science, I've also always felt like there's something more to all of this, right? My sense was always that there's got to be stuff going on that our scientific instruments aren't sensitive enough to pick up, and that we just can't see with our eyes. But when he died, that vague sense of something more was no longer enough. And to me, I started then focusing on the science that I had always learned, which says that when you die, you die. When the brain stops receiving oxygen, what you think of as you and your awareness also stops and goes away. And if that was true, sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, that's so true what you're saying. That I just want to ask you as well, what did he die of?
Yeah, we don't know. We actually didn't do an autopsy. We just assumed it was a cardiac event, a major cardiac event of some kind. He was found in his house with his keys still in his hand. So he had just gone inside his house, up the steps, and then died. And I was with him 10 minutes before that. We were together watching a football game on television together. And then he left. We were at my mom's house and he lived 5 minutes away. So he left, drove the 5 minutes, walked in the house, and then died.
But then he wasn't discovered until the next day. Is that right? Or for yourself, it was the next
day? That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. The next day, he didn't show up to work the next day, which would never happen. My dad never missed a day of work, possibly literally never missed a day of work. And certainly if he was going to miss one, he would have called, and he didn't. So a coworker of his actually got very worried and drove to his house. So I got the phone call the next day while I was bartending. I was at work on Broadway when I got the phone call.
When you look at it, right, with obviously you've done this book and you're on the Netflix documentary, docuseries, which we'll link below as well. Everything's below in the description. But when you look at it, obviously Dad never lived a sort of a life where, he was out there on the stage in a sense, talking about whatever it is that he's passionate about. But obviously, with you doing what you're doing right now, I mean, obviously his name's out there, isn't it? Which, I'm sure he would. Well, how would you feel about that, do you think?
That's one of my favorite things to think about because, like I said, my dad was the most humble person I'd ever met. I don't have a whole lot of photos of him because he didn't like to be in front of the camera. If anything, he was behind the camera taking the pictures. He did not like being the center of attention, but his love was immense. He was this immensely loving guy. So if anybody was going to try to get a message from the other side, from beyond whatever that veil is, it's not a surprise to me that it would have been my dad, even though it's not his personality to be very outgoing like this. And now to think of millions of people seeing him and hearing his voice on the Netflix series. I laugh thinking about what that might be like for him. I'm sure his face is red and he's trying to hide in a corner somewhere.
Yeah, no, it's incredible, isn't it, to be able to switch Netflix on and there's your part in that docuseries, and there's your sort of flowers and gift to, in a sense, to your dad. Do you know what I mean? Every time someone watches it, it's I mean, yeah, isn't life crazy how it goes in directions that we just will never ever think it would go. And obviously there was the gap when obviously Dad passed and then you found out, but there was the gap as well before I believe a family member contacted you or contacted your mother a week after your dad's passing, and they had a message for your mum. But just before we go into that as well, at the funeral, I think you also felt as well that when you looked at that casket, that was not your dad, that was just the body.
Yeah, it was one of the most bizarre experiences of my entire life to walk in that room and see him in that casket, see him. And yeah, it became this real question to me. What could have been the thing that made that big of a difference between the guy that I had been talking to a few days before that and the thing that I saw in that casket, right? Because if you had a powerful enough microscope, it would be the exact same stuff under that microscope right now, that thing in that casket, as if you looked at my dad under a microscope a few days before. The constituents of what made up my father were all still there. He was all the same cells, the same protons, neutrons, and electrons. And yet he was so not my dad anymore. And I really started to, what was the thing? If science is correct, that we're just all chemical reactions, what was the thing that gave those protons, neutrons, and electrons their distinct dadness to me a few days ago, that is not there now? What is it? So yeah, it was a very bizarre thing, and that's something I think about all the time, and it's a question that mainstream science struggles with, right? This idea of consciousness. How can it be that if all we are is the object, how did that object become aware of itself, if that's all that there is in the universe? And it's a tough question to answer, and mainstream scientists struggle to do it, and in my opinion, can't do it. And it struck me very starkly, that question, when I saw the molecules that had made up my dad still in the same shape as my dad, but totally not my dad anymore.
I mean, we have so many unanswered questions, don't we, about what is the nature of reality, and why are we here? And we'll get into some of those bits with your journey as well. But you talk about in your book, well, you kind of cover it as well, and you've covered it in other interviews, I think, that when Dad was gone, you felt like he was gone into the nothing, the void, you called it, and as if people are still getting their Starbucks, and living their lives, and your dad's gone and your life is destroyed. And that's the same for a lot of people that go through grief, isn't it? Everything's around them is going on as normal, but your life is in pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's it can be a shattering event, and for me, it was a shattering event, and for my family as well. Yeah, and as I wrote in the book, it just started to make me wonder, what is the point of anything at all? If someone as extraordinary as him could suddenly be gone, like he'd never walked the planet, as though that the universe is these 15 billion years, as far as we know, approximately 15 billion years. And then we're just this blip, this instantaneous almost blip on the universe's radar. And we're lost then to the sea of time and space. What's the point of doing anything? Why are we, for some scientists, this is a beautiful thought, and it makes them feel like it's such a gift to have this moment right now, to be aware of how improbable and how transitory our moment is. But for me, it was not a beautiful thought anymore. For me, it was terrifying, and I was thinking I would have rather just have stayed in the nothingness than to be aware for this brief moment and spend that awareness knowing that I'm going to be unaware again. That doesn't seem fair. If there is some larger whatever, that doesn't seem like a fair thing to do. So yeah, that's where I was. I was questioning the meaning of anything at all.
I mean, as I get older, I don't know about yourself, life goes so quickly. It goes by so quickly, and I'm thinking, Christ, yes, when I was younger, I used to think, oh yeah, got loads of time, right? It's not. I don't know. As you get older, it's just you see the finite in it all, don't you? In some respects as well, like and we're all going to lose our parents. Would you say losing a child is just as difficult as losing a parent, or do you think that not having ever gone through that, but having lost someone close, do you think you can't judge it like that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have kids, but I can only imagine that losing a child is the worst thing, the hardest thing, because it's at least when you lose a parent, it's sort of the natural progression of things, I mean, not that still painful, of course, yes, but they've lived their lives out, depending on how old they've gotten. To lose a child, though, I have a friend, a very close friend, who lost a child, and that's a kind of pain that I cannot fathom.
No, but you've got some sort of understanding of it now, and I'm sure with what you've done and what you've put out there and other things that you're going to do as well was all for a reason, and nothing's wasted. Yeah. So let's just move this forward a little bit to when your mother got the phone call from a family member, and take it from there.
Yeah. Yeah. A few days after the funeral, it was only like 1 or 2 days. My second cousin called my mom's house, and this is a guy who I was not close with. He was, again, he married into our family, and I think I may have seen him at a wedding like 15 years ago or something. So basically, to me, almost a stranger. And he called my mom, and he said, "Hey, Liz," and he'd never called my mom before, ever. And she said, "Oh, hi." Surprised that it was him, because they were not close, but assuming he must be calling to offer condolences. But instead he said, "Do you know what I do?" And she said, "No." He was a hospital administrator. That's what we thought he did. And he said, "Well, I have this hobby. I'm a ghost hunter." And she said, "Oh, okay." And my mom had never heard of ghost hunting or anything like that. And then he said, "And on my team, we have a medium. She's a person who can sense dead people." And she said, "Okay." And as it turned out, this medium lived in Arizona, right? And connected only occasionally, I guess, with this ghost hunting group that my cousin is a part of here in Connecticut. So out in Arizona, apparently, according to her, this man out of body was tapping her on the shoulder, desperate to get a message to his family that he was okay. She told him that his name was Robert, and that his someone in his family owned a fish restaurant. And through those two items, she felt the need to tell my cousin this for some reason. She felt like it was connected to his family somehow. And then through those details, once he said the fish restaurant, he remembered that my sister has a fish restaurant, and he put it together. Oh my God, Robert is their father's name. And that's how he put it together. So from her perspective, what happened is my dad came out of his body, saw how desperate we all were, how we didn't know how we could go on without him. And he looked around and found like the closest person to us connected in any way that he could get to get a message to us. And it happened to be this medium who was a friend of our second cousin. That was like the closest connection he could find. And he was not going to stop, according to her, until he got the message to us. So that's how mediumship dropped into our lives. For most people, mediumship is something they seek out. And for us, it came to us.
So you brought that medium to, well, I believe to your house, to your home. I believe there was a sort of family get together and an arranged sort of time when she was going to come down and give a sort of group reading to the family. Is that right?
It was actually a different medium.
Oh,
Yeah.
it?
So after we got that phone call, I was intrigued, but I needed way more. My scientific skeptical mind is still going overtime all the time. So I spoke with her for a long time. I concluded that she wasn't crazy. That was the most I could conclude. She seemed to be a compassionate, lovely person. There was no money that anyone was ever asked. It seemed to me to just be a person who truly believed what she was saying. And then a few days after that, my sister happened to hear on the way to work in the morning a radio show that had a medium on it who was giving readings to listeners who were calling in. And after hearing my story about talking to this woman who'd called her house, my sister Jen, was intrigued. So she booked a private reading with this medium that she'd heard on the radio that morning. And so, she came to our house, and I decided that I wanted to test her to see if this was real or not. What I knew of mediumship before this was John Edward from Crossing Over on television and the Long Island Medium. But that was on television. Who knows how produced that is? You just can't know. So I was standing by myself in my dad's house, and I said, "Dad, this woman's coming here tonight. If this is real, I need you to mention my hair." My hair was a code word. My hair is like this super average thing. No one would ever come in and say, "Oh my gosh, there's got to be a crazy story about this guy's hair." It's nothing that anyone would ever notice. So I said, "If she's real, I want you to have her mention my hair. If I don't hear her say that, I'm not going to be able to believe that this is real." So she came to the house. The reading lasted for almost 2 hours, and it was extraordinary. Everything she was saying was incredibly accurate, and it was not stuff that she could have found on the internet or on Facebook or in an obituary. It was personal, private stuff. For instance, almost quoting a conversation my sister and I had privately the day before. It was things like that. And it was so extraordinary that I forgot about my my experiment and my code word because I was blown away by what was happening. And then we're all weeping, we're all crying. So if this woman is faking this, if she's doing cold reading or some form of hot reading, she's done a remarkable job. Everyone is going to leave and she's going to get a whole bunch of work out of this, right? So if you are a fraud, that's when you leave. You've mission accomplished, walk out the door while you're ahead. But instead, as we're wrapping up, apropos of nothing, by the way, we were talking about something else and she stopped. And then she looked at me and she said, he wants to talk about your hair. And I could not believe it. I for a second, it knocked the wind out of me. And my mom and my sister are saying, what's wrong? What? Because I hadn't even told them. This was entirely just between me and my dead father. And somehow this woman said the thing that I asked him to say. So that changed my life. And that's what sent me down this road of investigating mediumship.
So what was some of Dad's biggest messages back then, in the sense? I mean, what was he trying to convey to you? I mean, I'm sure love was a big part of it, but yeah.
Yeah, it's almost all things that are not evidential, right? So if you're wanting to know whether or not mediumship is a real phenomenon, you need evidence that the medium is saying something that she could not have known by normal means, right? So this woman said a lot of those little things, she did, but the main messages, of course, are I love you, I'm okay, which is what we desperately needed to know. And those messages are great, and it was lovely to hear them. But the only reason that they carried the weight that they did is because these other things were stated as well. These other bits of evidence that did not have an emotional value to them, maybe, like saying, for instance, something like, this was a different medium, but the medium said, did you recently get scared by a mouse? And like not long before that, my sister and I had been in my father's closet cleaning up his stuff, and a mouse ran out and she jumped up on the bed, and we had this great laugh about it. So, things like that, evidential bits of information that the medium couldn't know by normal means, are what give weight to the more generic sentiments, which every medium says. Your dad loves you. He's proud of you. He's okay. He wants you to know he's okay. Those are the main messages.
Yeah. Did he talk about that this was his time, that that this wasn't a mistake?
He did. He talked a lot about that, that there was nothing we could have done, so that if we were worrying that maybe if we had kept a closer eye on him, we would have noticed that maybe he had been more tired than usual or anything like that. And he said, according to these mediums, multiple mediums, by the way, this is one of the things that's interesting to me, are the patterns that have emerged. Mediums who have said the exact same thing about my father. Every medium we've been to has focused on the fact that he died very quickly, like this, that he was here and then gone. They all describe it in an incredibly similar way. And that's important to us because we were worried tremendously about his last moment of life. I could not let it go, wondering if he had been in pain, if he was afraid because he was alone in the house. Did he know something was wrong and then he couldn't get to the phone? Like that drove me crazy. The idea that he could have been struggling there alone and afraid. And I needed to know whether or not that happened. I remember looking at the positioning of his body, and I got down in that position that he was in on the floor myself, trying to imagine what his last moment was, and just praying that it was very fast. So for each medium to focus on that is interesting to me. And it's not like these mediums were making multiple guesses. They didn't say, did your dad die of cancer? And we say, no. And then, oh, maybe a heart attack. They all said, your dad went like this. It's like he was here and then gone. It's like he was, he opened his eyes and then he closed them and he opened them again and he was on the other side. It was that fast. He didn't know anything was happening. So they focused a lot on how he passed.
It's really weird that normally it's the opposite way around, where you will be the one that goes out there and seeks it, not he's trying to communicate with you through someone else. I mean, that is unique.
Yeah, it was unusual, the way that we got started in this, in that he came to us instead of us going to a medium to find him. And it makes sense to me that he did, because I don't know that we would have sought out a medium ourselves. And I think if he truly was still alive and out of a body, if that's true, then that would mean he saw us there struggling, unsure how we could possibly move forward with our lives. And he figured out a way, knowing who my dad was, he would have gone to any length to figure out a way to let us know that he was okay. And he did. It was much more than just the mediumship, by the way. I mean, the book goes into some of the other what people call signs, right? That happened after he passed. And I also had a couple of dreams that were unlike any other dream I've ever experienced, more real than any dream I've ever had, burned into my memory. There was this one in particular. I open up the front door and he's standing there, and I can still feel, and we hugged. He didn't say anything. He was just smiling, and his eyes were like glowing almost. And he just hugged me, and I can still feel the hug today, can still feel it. So there were these other communications that are subjective in nature, right? Like you see a butterfly and it feels meaningful because of when it happens. But of course, there's something called patternicity, the way that the brain works. It very easily applies meaning to something where there might not be meaning. I'm aware of all of the things that the skeptics say. I'm hyper aware of all of that stuff. So I'll put that out there that yes, could it be patternicity? Of course it could. But when you put all of these things together, it feels to me like it's not simply patternicity, that there is something else going on here. And patternicity cannot explain some of the things that I've experienced with mediumship. And some of the, for instance, what happens at the end of the book, which I won't, I tend to not talk about it in interviews because it's better if you build up to it, because I hesitated to include it in the book. Because it's going to be so far beyond what the average person has heard about or will consider to be possible. What I can say is that when this happened, I was sitting beside a New York Times journalist whose word is her livelihood. She's a highly respected journalist, and it did happen. And she was with me, and the other people in the room were with me, and what I describe in the book is the absolute truth. And that event was sort of the climax, that it was indisputable that it happened, because my brain is so, it never lets me have it. You know what I mean? Like no matter how incredible an experience I have, it never fails that an hour or two later, I'm thinking, yeah, but maybe what about this,
I think
but
that's
this
healthy.
thing that,
I think that's healthy.
yeah. I do too. There's something called retrocognitive dissonance. There's a question as to if this is real. This really bugged me. Most of the people who are skeptics out there are very smart people. Not most of, I'm sorry. A lot of the people who are skeptics out there, scientific skeptics, are incredibly brilliant people. People like Richard Dawkins, and it bugged me that if I had if I was having these experiences that felt to me like something genuine was happening, why is it that these super smart people say it's not possible? Why haven't they experienced anything that leads them to believe something might be going on that they don't yet understand? Because they're smarter than I am, was my thought process. Maybe they know something I don't. I must be missing something if these hyper intelligent people are telling me that what I think happened didn't happen. But when what happened at the end, the sort of climactic thing that happened, that is indisputable. And so now I know without question that no matter how smart somebody is, no matter how studied they are, no matter how erudite their answer is for why my dad can no longer be alive, they are wrong when they say there is no such thing as anything, quote unquote, paranormal. It doesn't matter how many Nobel Prizes they have. If they say that, I personally know that they're not right.
Yes, and maybe it's your journey this time. If if you've done this before, maybe, right? Or who knows, right? But maybe it's your part of your choice right now to look at what is the opposite to looking into a greater reality. Is there some teachings that we can bring forth to become better versions of ourselves? Do you know what I mean? That some other way wouldn't allow that sort of breakthrough.
Yeah.
What are we here for? Well, I think having a human existence is a really important part of it. And I think some of these really smart people that you mentioned just there, I mean, what if they're part of their sort of reason for being here and doing what they're doing is to show the opposing opinion, to balance it out so that, everything's always in balance, or there's always, nothing's going to be given to you on a silver platter, and everyone's at different levels as well of what is the nature of reality.
Yeah. I think that's
Huge
really well
questions.
said.
Yeah.
Yeah. The way that I look at this now is that, this information is out there for those who seek it. That's the way that I see it now. And that's why I wrote this book. It's there for people who seek it. And maybe, like you said, there's a lot going on that we cannot possibly comprehend. And if I'm right, and that we are much more than this, and that we do live many, many lives, as to me, the evidence clearly points to that, or at least more than one life, I should say. The evidence clearly points to that. Then there's a lot going on that we just simply can't comprehend. And maybe these people, these scientists that we're talking about now, who are brilliant and yet say there is no possibility of multiple lives or reincarnation, perhaps they serve a purpose. My instinct would be to say that, yeah, they do serve a purpose. And maybe, there's nothing scientific now about what we're talking about, that we're just speculating, but my instinct, if I can just go on instinct, is that, they're viewing reality we all view reality from this very specific lens that the brain provides, right? It provides this very directed view of what reality is. And my sense of it now is that when we die, what happens is that filter, or that lens, dissolves away, and suddenly the blinders are gone. The blinders that the brain provides are gone, and now we have this larger perspective. And my blinders point me to my human experience, and Richard Dawkins' blinders are pointing him to his human experience. And his brain is set up in a way that it does not allow very easily the notion of some of these paranormal things that we're talking about now. And there's something called retrocognitive dissonance, which I've looked into a bit, right? Most people know what cognitive dissonance is. It's when something happens that threatens your worldview, maybe your sense of ego, it somehow threatens you at a foundational level. It's frightening for your brain, for your ego, for your psychology. And the brain is remarkably good at letting that stuff go by as though it didn't even hear it. So if you are someone who believes there's no way there can possibly be reincarnation, maybe because of a religious belief, you believe that, or maybe you're terrified of the idea that we have to come back again and again and again, for whatever reason, you cannot accept that. Your brain is amazing at dismissing the evidence, no matter how good the evidence is. If I show it to you, the brain, for maybe self-preservation reasons, just can let that stuff sort of go. And I have it myself a lot as well. I mean, that's what I was talking about before. In the moment, I'll have an experience. And while it's happening, I'm saying, well, that's it. I don't need to study another thing in my life. I now know this is real, right? But an hour later, my brain is going, wait, but what about this angle? What about that? That's retrocognitive dissonance. You're going back in time, and your brain is trying to reframe what happened to comport with some part of our psychology that we don't understand. So it's a hugely complicated question. And to make it even more complicated, quantum physics now says that reality, apparently, we've known for a long time that time is relative, right? Everyone has their own individual time, as hard as that is to fathom. Depending on where you are in space and how fast you're moving, your time is personal. It now appears that physical reality is also relative. And a study done, I think it was at MIT, just within 5 months or 6 months maybe, shows that it seems like there is no objective reality. There's the Schrodinger's cat thing in science, which a lot of people have heard of, right? Is the cat dead or alive? If you look at it, it's dead, you know. And what this experiment shows us is that it can be both. So one person can look at it and the cat can be alive. Another person can look at it and the cat can be not alive. And they both somehow exist at the same time. So that throws a whole nother wrench into this thing. Maybe for Richard Dawkins, there is no reincarnation or whatever from this perspective. It's
absolutely. And what if our understanding of what we think reincarnation is just a grain of sand on an infinite beach of the understanding of it? What if it was so much more, and that yet we've boxed it in as being, oh, it's like this because that's how we perceived it to be, or we want it to be, or it's a shared reality on what it wants to be, but it's actually nothing like that. What if the life between life review stage is so much bigger than we could possibly even imagine? Every ounce of what we think we know, actually none of it's right, but it's only because we're where we are, and that this is where we're at, and we can barely love ourselves, yet let alone others right now at this level. And maybe whatever we are, our true nature, whatever this isness, this soul, with whatever you want to call it, the all that is, whatever the air, I don't know, whatever you want to pray to, maybe it doesn't even understand itself, and it's trying to find itself through us and myriads of ways of doing it, and we're all working together on some sort of get together. I don't know, at some stage, who knows, but at this level where me and you are talking, just day-to-day stuff's difficult for us right now, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? For a lot of us, but I think it is important to explore this, but I think it's also important to be grounded. Maybe the others out there, like Dawkins and other people, give us the qualities of groundedness in this, not to, get too far sucked into anything. But here's the thing: even if none of this was true, what we're saying, even if this medium that brought your father through, none of it was true, and we just thought it was true based on other people's perception of what they think reality is, right? But isn't the core crux of all this is that if we die tomorrow and we go into a void of nothingness, complete nothingness, what space did you live your life from? And if getting into these subjects helps you to get into that better version of yourself, even if it's the last breath you take, it's the better version, great, at least you got there, for that split second. Maybe it's about, maybe there's some quality in that as well. I don't know.
I think maybe is a great word. That's. I
mean, I want your dad to continue. Don't get me wrong.
Oh yeah, no. Yeah, I agree with everything that you're saying. The way that we started this conversation is that the foundation, we don't understand so much. We don't understand the foundations of how all of this works. So for anyone to say that anything is possible or impossible, to me, doesn't make much sense.
Here's another thing from this conversation. If you could speak to your dad now, you have the ability, I'm sure you do, we all do, but a medium's, just a bit more, open to that sort of stuff. Or wired differently, who knows, right? Or done it many more times, who knows? Or just gives themselves permission to do it, so they can do it, right? But that idea that love is all there is, and that if we were to love, see each other as equal, and that love that your father's talking about that he has for you, but we were to give it to others as well, the sort of balance that would bring in the world, do you know what I mean? And the imbalance that's out there wouldn't be, quite as, religion's not been able to get to that perfect balance, has it? And I wonder if there's just too many restrictions on that.
Yeah, I agree. You're aware of life between life therapy, Michael Newton's work. Yeah, I mean, those folks, I remember talking to Peter Smith, who was the president of the Newton Institute for a while. And he said, if everyone could experience just a brief taste of this other realm or whatever space, it would change the world overnight. It would change it overnight. And I tend to agree with him. It's a, I'm interested in where phenomenon overlap, right? So this life between life therapy, where you supposedly can go back to a past life and then die in that past life and then go through the death process. where that crosses over with people who have near-death experiences, right? People who die and then are resuscitated in this life. And one of the things, one of the main things that people who have near-death experiences say, and people who have this sort of LBL therapy, is that love, and maybe as silly as it might sound, truly is the basis of everything. And the most important thing that we can do is be kind to each other. People who I'm struck at, because I talk to a lot of people now who have near-death experiences, and a few of them, I find this great. They call them, they refer to themselves as having been jerks before they died and then came back, and they realize now that the important thing about being alive is being here for each other. I think that that's true. And so it's neat to think that my dad is still here for me, even without a body.
Do you ever think to yourself, Mike, what journey Dad has been on, and, maybe even, what he's up to right now?
I think about that all the time. Yeah, I had this extraordinary dream with him, and I was at a party, and then I suddenly realized in the dream that he was dead, and I said, "Wait a minute, yeah," and it occurred to me that I was wherever he is. We were in this beautiful big house, and everyone at this party was someone that I knew in this dream, even people I didn't recognize, but I knew them somehow. Anyway, it was one of the most remarkable dreams of my life. And at one point I said, "Dad, what do you do here? What's a day like here in this place that you are?" And then all of a sudden we were in scrubs, like hospital scrubs. And we were at a hospital. And my cousin, a different cousin of mine, ran out of a room frantic because her son was injured. Okay. So that happened. And that was like this odd detail. That everything else in the dream is beautiful, right? It's this beautiful dream I'm having. And there's this one moment when a cousin of mine, who I'm not all that close with, runs out, and she's panicked because there's something wrong with her son. And then we move on to the next thing. And my dad shows me that what he does over there, at least in my dream, is somehow help young souls, people who pass who are young, cross over. That's sort of in this dream, that's what he did. And in the dream, it made total sense. I was like, oh, wow, that's a perfect job for you. You're such a great, he's such a gentle, beautiful energy that it would make total sense that he'd be there to help younger souls who might be confused somehow cross over. That's not a notion I'd ever thought of in my life, by the way. That's not something that's ever crossed my mind, the idea of helping people cross over, or what maybe a young person might need a certain kind of help that an older person doesn't. That's never crossed my conscious mind. But anyway, that's what he showed me in this dream. So then I wake up and I'm scrolling through Facebook, and that cousin of mine, as it turns out, there's a photo of her son in a hospital bed, and he's got like stitches. I can't remember exactly what happened. He like fell down, and I forget exactly what it was. But in that moment, again, there's now retrocognitive dissonance. But in that moment, I thought, oh my gosh, this was a little detail thrown into that dream to show me that there was something real happening in that dream, because something then in my physical life happened that matched what happened in that bizarre dream. So according to my dream, that's part of what he does. He helps people cross over.
Well, there's been many times where you've sort of questioned all that you're doing right now. And I suppose that can be hard sometimes when, you go down a path where you're like, okay, this is going to prove it to me, even though I've got all this wonder, amazing, connections and everything with the people that I've met that could have not got this information from anywhere. But you did go to like a Penn and Teller event, for example, and they sort of, that sort of destroyed your, it didn't destroy, it was, there is a story to this. If you want to tell it very quickly.
Yeah, Penn and Teller are magicians, well-known magicians, and they do a bit called the psychic comedian, I think they call it. And in it, they do quote unquote mind reading, right? And it's just a trick, but it's an amazing trick. And Penn and Teller are passionately anti-mediumship. They think there's no such thing as anything paranormal, and they think that anyone who is calling themselves a medium is a villain because that they're just preying on grieving people. He thinks that they're morally corrupt, terrible people. And he starts off this bit by saying everything you're about to see is bullshit, which is what the name of their Showtime. Is that okay to say? I'm so sorry.
No, absolutely. Go for it.
Okay. That's the name. They had a Showtime show called Bullshit. And that's what they tried to do, is debunk all of these different things. And mediums is one of the main things that they try to debunk. So they do this extraordinary trick at this Broadway show that was happening in a theater that I work for. And I was completely disheartened when they did this trick, because I was thinking, well, if they could do that, maybe this medium that I've been working with is somehow doing the same thing. Now, granted, Penn and Teller are magicians who have worked for decades at honing their craft. The medium I was working with, she had a full-time job for most of her life and a family. And so how she could have on the side sort of become this miraculous mind reader also was hard to imagine. But if Penn and Teller were doing this, it definitely made me think, well, maybe that's what she's doing. So I left the theater and I was despondent, frankly. I was so sad because I had accumulated what I had thought was all of this great evidence by that point. So I decided I was going to go back the next day. Because I worked at the theater, I could go anytime. I was going to go back the next day just to try to figure out part of what they were doing. And at the moment, I was in the Marquee Theater, which is in Times Square, inside the Marquee Hotel on Broadway. Okay, so you have to go in through the bottom doors, you have to go up an escalator through another set of doors, and then into the theater doors. Okay, so to get into this theater, it's a maze. You have to do a lot to get inside this theater on the second floor in Times Square. And at the moment that Penn is saying the words, everything you are about to see is bullshit, and he pauses between the two words for effect. And during that pause, I see about 15 feet above his head, there's a flutter in the lights. And I look up, and it's a butterfly. There's a butterfly fluttering through the lights up inside the theater. And other people notice it. Like there's in the audience, there's a little titter throughout the audience. Because it's a very rare thing to see a butterfly inside a Broadway theater. Now, the reason this is important is because butterflies at that point had become this very significant sign between my dad and I. And again, I know skeptics are going to say this is definitely a result of patternicity. The butterflies were always there. I'm only noticing them now. I'm giving meaning to them now. That's not really there. I know that's what skeptics are going to say. All of that said, butterflies appeared to be happening, coming into my life at moments that were profound and significant, okay, before this happened. So that had already been this sign. So then, as I'm standing in the back of the theater, and the words are landing heavy on my heart that all of what I'm about to see is bullshit, this butterfly appears in the lights and starts flapping through the theater. So that made me feel like, well, I've worked on Broadway now for 14 years, 15 years. I'd never seen a butterfly in a Broadway theater. Never. In Times Square, you don't see butterflies very often. It's not like there's a lot of trees in Times Square. It's concrete and pavement everywhere, So just to see one in the middle of Times Square is unusual. To see one inside a Broadway theater up on the second floor, highly unusual. Then a few days after that, Penn came to see Hamilton, which is the theater that I work at. Yes. So he's standing by my bar, and I'm thinking about whether or not I want to, because I was making a documentary, and I wanted him to be in the documentary to explain his side of things, because I wanted to cover all of it. And the day before he came to that theater, I was talking to a friend of mine, and I was like, Marie, what are the, we're behind the bar. I'm like, what are the chances that butterfly appeared right when Penn was saying those words? Have you ever seen a butterfly before? And while we're having that conversation, out of the corner of my eye, I see a flutter. And sure enough, there's a butterfly now in my theater. As I'm having this conversation with my friend, about seeing this butterfly at the other theater. And in the book, there are pictures of the some people that I work with looking at it landed up in a chandelier. And you can see the look of incredulity on people's faces because they'd also been on Broadway for years and years and years, and none of them had ever seen a butterfly. They don't even know the story about my dad and seeing the butterfly at Penn. The look on their faces is just out of sheer surprise of seeing a butterfly at all in a Broadway theater. So that's now the second one that I've seen. And then, yeah, a day after that, Penn is standing underneath that chandelier. And I decided in that moment that I was going to not talk to him about the documentary because it just felt to me like for some people, there are these walls that are up and they're impenetrable. And it felt to me like Penn has one of those. And it felt to me like my dad had given me that sign over Penn's head to let me know, no, this is not bullshit. And also there are some things that are not worth your energy. And like trying to convince Penn is one of those things not worth your energy.
So tell me about the documentary. Did you finish the documentary then?
No, because in the middle of that is when the Surviving Death Netflix series came along. One of the people in my documentary, her name is Leslie Kane. She wrote the book Surviving Death, which is what the series is based on. And she's the New York Times journalist that I was talking about before. Netflix decided to do a 6-part series based on her book while we were filming my documentary. And she brought my story to them. And so that's how I got involved with Netflix. They decided to use some of my story in 3 episodes of their series. So I may, once the world is a bit more back to normal, pick the documentary up again. Because I'm focusing more on, there will be more evidence in my documentary than you get to see in the Netflix series.
Right. Okay. And so that Netflix series, was that through a third-party production company that works for Netflix, or that was yeah,
right?
It was.
Yeah, a company called Breakthrough Films.
So coming back to the book, Mike, when did you decide to write that book, and why did you write the book?
I started writing the book just this summer, probably in June. And the reason was because after I had these experiences, I found myself sharing the story with people who had lost people in their lives. And it was bringing comfort to some people. And, that was a lovely feeling, helping people who were grieving to see that there is definite evidence out there. And after everything that I'd been through, I was now sure that I was telling them the truth. One of the reasons I did the documentary and continue to investigate this is because now that I was telling people my story, I personally needed to know that I was telling them the truth. That I really did experience what I thought that I did. And once I was sure of that, and, once I had the experience that you'll read at the end of the book, and I was absolutely sure of what happened, I decided to write the book because there are people out there suffering the way that I was suffering after my dad died. And if I had a book like this, I think it might have eased some of that suffering. And there are other books that did do that for me, written by other people with similar stories. So that's why I decided to write the book. It comes from a point of view of a guy who is skeptical by nature, but open-minded, who really went to great lengths to prove to himself that what was happening was a genuine phenomenon, and that led me to feel like my dad truly is still here. So my hope, death is so present right now in so many lives, especially this year with COVID. It's just my hope that it might ease some people's suffering. I hope that people find it who might need it.
If you had just one important message, Mike, right now, what would that be?
The thing that's been most important to me, it's changed my life to have this avenue of wonder opened up to me. Once you realize that there is so much more that we do not understand, it makes all of this for me even more precious, and it kind of has added a levity to my whole life. I mean, knowing for sure that we are more than our bodies allows me to not worry so much about the end of this physical life, and enjoy the time that we do have here. So, if there's any message that I've learned from all of this, bringing all of these things together, it's that I don't know what any of it means, but a sense that love and goodness and being good to each other is an important part of all of this.
Absolutely. Well, I just want to say, Mike, your website one more time is?
MikeAnthony.com.
Well, Mike, that's coming up on the screen as we speak. I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been a real joy. Thank you for having me.